Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with a new review. As you can see from the title up there, I'm reviewing the 1978 superhero film directed by Richard Donner. It, of course, is Superman the movie. You will believe a man can fly. I have to tell you that I do believe a man can fly. You know, sorry, cheap joke, corner joke. Anyway, as you guys could know from past reviews, I did not really grow up with Superman that much. Like, I saw this movie like once when I was a kid that I can remember, and I guess I didn't really like it that much as a kid. But it's one of those superhero movies. As an adult, I appreciate it more. As a kid, I was more into Batman, and that's why as a kid I didn't really watch the Superman animated show. I only really watched his crossovers with Batman. But I have to say this is probably one. I have to say that I could put this in my favorite superhero films now. I'll say it's not a perfect film, which I do have a few problems which I will address with it, but it is an overall delightful film, and I'm not the only one that feels that way. It has a 7.3 on IMDb, has a 77% with the audience, and a 93% with the critics, and here's the consensus. Superman deftly blends humor and gravitas, taking advantage of the perfectly cast Christopher Reeve to craft a loving, nostalgic tribute to an American pop culture icon. And I will agree with that, because that's part of the way you could tell that the people who were behind this film were fans of the character, and how they did that. Now, in order to talk about this film, I think I probably should talk about some of the production. It started back in '73 when Salkind, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his first name, Salkind was one of the producers. He conceived the idea in late '73, and about a year later, he had the rights to the character, because it was a difficult process to get them from DC, which I could see why, because I believe before this there wasn't really that many theatrical superhero movies other than like serials or something, so you could see that this would be a big risk making a big budgeted version of it, and I can see why. And of course it was worth the risk. Now, at first DC had a list of actors that they considered for the role, and among them were Muhammad Ali, which that would have been very interesting actually. Al Pacino, James Caan, Steve McQueen, Clint Eastwood, and Dustin Hoffman. All interesting choices as well. And but I will say I'm glad they actually went with the then unknown Christopher Reeve, which we'll get to a little bit more. Another decision that the filmmakers made at this time was the decision to film two movies back to back. And they also made a negative pickup deal with Warner Brothers, which is basically they'll finance the movie. All Warner Brothers has to do is distribute it. Which, learning that's basically the shorthand version of it, but after learning that, I actually find it a little funny that Warner Brothers actually had the audacity to do to Donner what they eventually did to him, which you guys all know. Those of you who know your movie history know what happened, but I'll explain it when I get to the next movie. Now, at first, one of the directors that they considered at first was Steven Spielberg, but they wanted to wait until his Big Fish opens, which of course is Jaws, which was very successful, so they decided to ask Spielberg to do it. But by the time they approached him, he was already going on to do Close Encounters, and he couldn't pull out. So they decided to go for someone else, and eventually they got Richard Donner, the guy who directed the Lethal Weapon films. Eventually would direct the Lethal Weapon films, this was before that, so. Anyway, when it comes to the casting of Superman, another person they wanted was Robert Redford, which I have not really seen any of his acting performances. The only movie involved with him that I know I've seen was The Conspirator, and he was the director, which if his direction is any indication, he does know a lot about acting. And it would have been it would have been interesting, but like I said, glad they went with an unknown. Same with Burt Reynolds, but that I can't see him doing Superman. They also asked Sylvester Stallone, apparently, which, in retrospect, people are like, ah, come on, Sylvester Stallone is Superman, but in his young career, I could actually see Stallone pulling off Superman, but like I said, I'm glad they went with Reeves. Paul Newman was also offered a choice of roles. He was offered Superman, Lex, and Jor-El for $4 million, but he decided to turn down all three. And of course, when they decided to go with an unknown, the casting director, he suggested Reeve, but Donner and the producers thought he was too young and too skinny. Which, I think both of those work to his advantage, because the skinny aspect, when you think of Superman, you think of him to be all buff and stuff, and the skinny aspect works to his advantage because you don't suspect him. It's the same reason why I actually think that Michael Keaton in the Burton Batman movies works, because you look at him like, that's Batman, come on. Then you look at Reeves, yeah, that's Superman, come on. Costume change. That's motherfucking Batman, that's motherfucking Superman. So, it works to the film's advantage. And also it goes with his other character, with the alter ego Clark Kent. And also the young aspect, it also goes with the character, because the character hardly ever seems to age physically. And he beat out 200 unknown actors, and I'm actually glad that he beat them out, because he did a perfect job. Now, in early 75 is when Marlon Brando signed on to play Jor-El, and he was paid $3.7 million and 11.75% of the box office grosses, which it totaled $19 million, which I have to say, the only other, that's ironic that the first Superman movie, one of the biggest actors makes a deal like that, and then for the first Batman movie, one of the biggest actor in the movie makes a deal like that, although Jack Nicholson made way more money than Brando made off of this, but you got to also take into account the 10 years of inflation. But those type of deals, I could say I think that actors should probably do a little bit more of, instead of just demanding a lot of money up front. Because this is just a little thing. I feel that the most an actor should ever demand up front is $15 million, and even that's kind of pushing it, even with inflation. Because you're an actor, you should be compensated for it. But I feel acting, it's also for the fun of doing the role. Granted, some of them probably they start off that, then they just do it just to make money, and that's why they demand it. But for me, it's the fun of the role. But anyway, sermon over. Now Brando, he's only in a handful of scenes, but he does a good job, and he actually did make one big contribution to the film that eventually actually made it into the comics, and that is the Superman S. He actually suggested that the S be the elf family crest, and it works. Of course, in the comics, it eventually comes to mean the symbol of hope for Krypton, which is what it is in the newer films, but I think it is interesting. And of course, the film made other contributions to the comics, like the crystalline-based technology of Krypton, a couple of characters, Jor-El, how he survives after the destruction of the planet, among others. And of course, Lois Lane being the one that coins the name Superman, which of course they kind of do make fun of that in the trailer for Man of Steel, if you guys have noticed, which I thought was interesting. Now, one thing I could kind of see, this is kind of obvious, is the fact that multiple writers were involved in the script. There's 5 here, apparently. Mario Puzo, David Newman, Leslie Newman, Robert Benton, and Tom Mankiewicz. That's just my guess. It's Mankiewicz, so forgive me if I mispronounce that, but it's just that. And it was based off a story that Mario Puzo did, and you can kind of tell it is 5. It's probably each adding other ideas, but it works. Now, the plot of the film is that on the planet Krypton, evidence is used by the scientist Jor-El and the ruling council to sentence 3 criminals, General Zod, Ursa, and Non, to eternal living death in the Phantom Zone. And of course, this does not please Zod. He just says he's going to have revenge before he's sent on. At the same time, Jor-El is trying to get the council to believe his hypothesis that Krypton is about to explode. They say no. He says he won't leave the planet. That's Roxy. Apparently, I think she just fell asleep. But anyway, Jor-El, after the decision of the council, Jor-El puts his son Kal-El in a spaceship and launches the child towards Earth before the planet explodes. A few years later, he lands outside of the town of Smallville, where Kal-El is found by an American couple, Jonathan and Martha Kent. They notice after an incident that there is something strange about the child, so they adopt him and rename him Clark Kent after Martha's maiden name. Around the time he graduates high school, his father passes away. I'm not going to spoil it. And since he does know that he is their adopted child and there's something wrong with him, he decides to go out into the world to find out who he is. He eventually makes his way to the North Pole, where with the crystal that was in the ship with him, he creates the Fortress of Solitude and meets a hologram of his father that is interactive and finds out who he is. And of course, we get probably the most famous line in the movie. I know it's on this page. I want to find it. Dang it. It's a good line. That's a line that they always use, and it should be. Oh, I think I almost found it. Dang it. I know I'm wasting a little bit of time here, but it's such a good line. Let's see. I think it's on Marlon Brando on here. Anyway, I'm just gonna paraphrase it, and I'm probably gonna get the gist of it right. Here it is. Here's the line. The people of Earth can be a good people if they wish to be. For that, above all else, the capacity for good, I have sent them you, my only son. It's stuff like that, along with some other stuff in the movie that some people have seen the movie as an allegory for Jesus, and I could see that, especially from that line alone. Now, it skips ahead 12 years, and Clark is now both Superman, and he is now becoming a reporter at the Daily Planet. There he meets his co-worker Lois Lane, and you can tell that there's an attraction on his part at first, but he portrays himself as awkward, and I have to say that's part of my problem with not only the movie, but with the character Superman in general. And I will say, I understand the whole awkward thing. It's, well, part of his thing, so nobody suspects who he is. And also, as Quentin Tarantino had the character Bill in Kill Bill point out, it's basically Superman's critique of the human race, and basically, I guess you could say, a caricature of the human race. And I could see that, you could see that obviously, but it just gets a little, I guess, I don't know if the word off-putting would be the correct word to describe how I feel about this, but it's just seems like Superman overdoes it a little bit when he's trying to act that way. And and of course, while I'm on the subject, I should also point out that he has the stupidest disguise. Think of it. Look at me. No glasses, glasses. No glasses, glasses. Does it really look that different to where nobody would understand who you are? That's one of those things that's been parodied a lot, so that part I don't complain about that much. I just go with it, but it's one of the weirdest things, but I'll buy it because of the time when the comic came out. But as for the behavior, with this film, I can buy it, and even with the cartoon, although I think they toned it down in the 90s cartoon. But it's one thing that you don't really need to see them repeat, but it works, especially with how Reeves did the performance. He made it very believable. And also, I do like the little moments where you could tell that the whole thing is a facade, like when he catches the bullet and does a little smile and all that. I do like that you could tell that, you know, he's like breaking characters subtly. It works. And of course, how Superman first reveals himself, I'm not going to spoil, but it is a good way to do it, especially with 70s technology and stuff. Probably would be a lot more elaborate now, but it works for them. And it still looks very great on screen. And how they get Superman to fly and all that, you don't see wires at all, and it works great, which probably once I get down the line in the series, you'll be hearing a little bit of ranting on that. Now, of course, I have to talk about the villain, of course, Lex Luthor, played by Gene Hackman, and I have to say he was perfectly cast in this role. But if you compare his Lex Luthor's characterization to like further versions, it is kind of one-dimensional a little bit, but it works because his character is kind of an embodiment of the evil of capitalism, that at sometimes it could be more about making money than human safety. Though in this Luthor's case, he takes it to the extreme with his plot, which I'm not going to spoil it. I'll just say it involves real estate. And and I know that Lex Luthor is a villain that can be overplayed sometimes, which I guess is why they decided not to use him in Man of Steel, which I can agree with, but it would be interesting to see how they work him in there, especially the more elaborate version. But how he figures out how about Superman and all that, you kind of wonder, how's he figuring this stuff out? But if he has a 200 IQ, it's believable. And Hackman is such a great actor that how he says the stuff, you don't really question it that much, but it's on the back of your head wondering, but it works, and he is kind of a good foil for Superman, and even though they're only in 2 scenes together, they do play off each other good in those 2 scenes. Now, my other major problem with the film is the ending, and I'm not going to spoil it here, but it also connects into one of my major problems with Superman as a character, and that is a lot of his powers are dictated by the plot. That is one of my major problems with Superman. I mean, I like his earlier incarnation, you know, faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, you know, stuff like that, and adding and flying and the laser vision. But as you get into the more elaborate powers, like the thing he has at the end of this, or even in the fourth movie, the wall-building vision, and other stuff as the comics went on, that's where I'm like, okay, you really are stretching it by adding more and more of these type of powers onto him. And it all basically, I know he's supposed to be like a godlike character because of the difference in all the stuff. You know, the difference between Krypton and Earth and all that. But the way they keep adding stuff, it just is like, you know, you could tell that it's basically just dictating by plot. And to steal a line from LARP, plot is a bitch, but this is overdoing it, which... That's why I will agree with Doug Walker, aka the Nostalgia Critic, and say that the ending of this movie is kind of a cop-out. Especially considering he's going against one of the things his father taught him. But I can understand it, but I think they probably could have changed up the ending to make it less of so. Especially since it does, with how the ending is, it does kind of contradict one thing Lex says during their confrontation. Those of you who've seen the movie probably know what I'm talking about. But the ending aside, this is still a fun superhero movie, and even though I'm not a fan of the ending, it doesn't ruin the movie for me. I know that's kind of weird because sometimes usually the ending will ruin a movie, but but the reason that it doesn't ruin it is because I can understand it. It was one of the first big budget superhero movies, and also it's from the late '70s, so I guess it kind of fits with the time period and all that. Superman was seen in the comics at that time, so can't really be too harsh on it. But my rating for Superman the movie, I have to say a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Like I said, not enough to get a perfect score for me, but it is an excellent superhero movie. And if you haven't seen the movie, I suggest you find it. Now, in case anyone's wondering, this is the 4-disc set. I got this at Big Lots a while ago. Here it is. The first two, I've only watched one of the discs so far, and that's the movie. It has 2 versions of the movie, the original theatrical cut, which is what I watched, and the extended cut, which that's probably what I'm going to watch next time. And of course it has a documentary and a couple of movies on the last one. Oh yeah, I forgot to talk about the acting. Can't believe that. Now I know I talked about Hackman and I've briefly talked about Reeves. Reeves, basically, he's my favorite version of Superman so far. At least how the character, how the acting and stuff is. Although, like I said, I'm not a fan of that those 2 aspects of the character. Marlon Brando as Jor-El. He was perfect casting for the role, and he is a little, I wouldn't say monotonish, but kind of a little stoic, but I think that kind of fits the character a little bit, and I don't know if it was in it at the comics or not until later, but they did kind of mention that Kryptonians were kind of, you know, kind of like how a little bit more extreme version of the future people in Demolition Man, you know, a human, like, physical contact, stuff like that. And Brando, the moment you see him, he's very believable, even if in real life at times he could be kind of a you-know-what. Especially when it comes, though for the sequel, it's kind of understandable, even though it is connected to money as well. Okay, Ned Beatty as Otis Luthor's henchman. He works, typical bumbling henchman. Jackie Cooper as Perry White, Clark Kent's boss. He works. He's not my favorite of superhero boss. That honor goes to JJ from the Spider-Man movies, which you guys probably already know why. Glenn Ford as Jonathan Kent. Good job, even though he's only in 2 scenes. Margot Kidder as Lois Lane. Perfect casting choice. I really do believe she's very believable in the role, and I do like that she's not just a typical damsel in distress as the character was before this, even though some might argue that making her like this makes it a little bit even more upsetting for it. But for what happens in the movie, it's kind of, in this movie at least, it's kind of excusable because it's something beyond her control. She doesn't even realize it until it's too late. And the romance between her and Reeve is believable, and they do have some chemistry, and the flying romance scene with them is probably one of the highlights of the movie, at least, especially characterization-wise. Even though he's only in one scene. Terrence Stamp as General Zod. He does make his presence felt during that scene, and even more so from what I understand in the sequel. Phyllis Thaxter, I'm guessing that's Thaxter. I could be pronouncing it wrong. She does a good job as Martha Kent. I don't really remember much about the character from the cartoon or anything, but does a good job. Let's see. Marc McClure as Jimmy Olsen does a good job. His voice might be annoying to some people. It didn't bother me. And from what I understand, he auditioned for teenage Clark Kent, but I think he did better in this role. The guy that they got as teenage Clark Kent, you can tell it's obviously not his own voice, but he does actually look kind of like a young Christopher Reeve, which for this movie, I'd say that casting on based on that and acting is good. Later movie, from what I understand, not so much. Anyway, that's about it. The rest of the cast does a good job for their roles. I only want to talk about the main ones. Anyway, like I said, my rating 4.5 out of 5 stars, and if you haven't seen it, see it.